Hello, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us for our Remote First Expert Talks. I'm John Dickinson. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Equal Experts, and many of you will already be part of our Expert Talks communities that we run through Meetup. The focus of our Expert Talks events are on sharing our knowledge with the communities that we operate in, and that's so we can share our learnings, and also what we think is interesting within the community. So this is something that we at Equal Experts are very passionate about. So we've been looking at how we can continue to run these activities while everyone is having to practice physical distancing. So, and then our answer is really to take advantage of physical distancing to bring everybody in all the different geographies that are geographically dispersed, all those different communities, bring them together and then start running expert talks online in a slightly different format. So as ever, I wanted to say a call out to our colleagues in Portugal. So they've been one step ahead of us. So they've been leading the charge in the remote first world, and I've already run a few remote first expert talks. But this is the first talk where we've coordinated across a number of our different groups. So we're excited to see the turnout today. So normally the events are a bit longer and they can run for 2 or 3 hours. You'll be pleased to hear that's not, we're going to stick to the hour for today. So our plan is to run an expert talks event once a week. So there'll always be something for you to keep an eye out for. We're also going to record the talks. That was my cue, my indicator to press record, but I've already done it, so I'm ahead of the game. And then we'll be putting them on YouTube and then the Equal Experts site afterwards. So I see, actually, I just want to put a note out there about Q&A. So we'll be taking questions through the Q&A speech bubbles at the bottom of the screen. So any questions that you've got as Lyndsay's presenting, you type them in there. There's voting features on there as well. So if there are questions that you really want to hear an answer to, vote them up, and then we'll take them sort of from the highest priority to the lowest at the end. And that's it really. And feel free to chat, use the chat, but Q&A, that's where we'll answer the questions. Paul, I see you've got your hand raised. Is there? We're not. Do you want to ask if there's a question you want to ask? If you pop it on the chat, or if you pop it on the Q&A, that'd be great. So that is, I think, enough from me. The person you're here to listen to this evening is Lyndsay Prewer. Lyndsay is going to talk about one of the techniques that he's been pioneering at a number of our large clients, which is chaos days. So Lyndsay, over to you.
Great, thanks for the intro, John. Hi everyone, it's good to be chatting to you and talking to you about the experience we've gained over the last few years about running chaos days on large platforms. I'm going to start off by talking about what chaos engineering is. It may be a term that's perhaps new to you, and why it's important, why it's useful, kind of set of practices to consider when you're developing large-scale IT systems. If you've not been watching the news over the last few days, you may not have seen much about this actually in the news, because not much went wrong with it. The job retention scheme is a really great example of an IT system that was built really, really fast. It served a massive amount of traffic with very, very kind of few problems. In fact, there are no production incidents so far. On the kind of HMRC's website, it's shown just how successful it is in terms of how we can build things really, really quickly that serve a massive amount of traffic. Other things can be built really, really quickly as well. Another service that I like to talk about is Nest. I think this is a really great example of something that's far bigger than the job retention scheme. It's a planet scale service that can also be built really quickly using some of the technologies that we've got available to us. When you combine cloud technologies and things like serverless with agile and lean practices, The combination of those things and having awesome engineers means we can build things that people all around the world can use to do really cool things, and they're using underlying technologies like Google or Amazon or other cloud provider services that are really rock solid. They scale really well and they're really resilient. Which makes you wonder, well, when we have such tools at our disposal and we can build things really quickly, what could go wrong? Well, if you think back to almost this time last year, something did go wrong with the Nest service, and it had a very surprising impact. Nest, if you're not familiar with it, people use it to control aspects of their smart homes. Nest is connected to Google's cloud, and there was a problem with Google's cloud. And the impact of the problem that Google Cloud had was that people who were sat on their sofa were now unable to change their air conditioning. It's quite a lot of effort to get off your sofa, of course, and go and change the air conditioning dial on the wall, but people couldn't do it from their smartphones because of a problem that could have been on the other side of the world, as far as they're concerned. This was a great example of why chaos engineering is important, because the problem that led to this outage wasn't just one failure. It was three things happening all at the same time that combined in an unusual way to generate such like a widespread failure. I think this is a good example of why the systems that we're typically building have failures happening the whole time. But what's hard to predict and hard to understand is how, when several failures all happen together and combine in such a way, it's hard to predict what the impact of those combinations of failures can be. What chaos engineering allows us to do is to understand that better and help us design systems that are more resilient, and also become better engineers and manage the impact of failures on the systems in better ways. So we may not all be building things like Nest or the job retention scheme, but generally we're building fairly complex systems. And what I'd like you to consider for a system that you're either working on, a system that you know something about, think about what are the component parts that make up your system. So firstly, what are the parts that you have direct control over, the things that you code or kind of manage? What are also then component parts that you don't have control? What third-party systems does your service rely on? What third-party systems do those services rely on? And how are all these things connected? So then think through, for all of those different components, be they your own or third parties, and all the connections between them, how much do you know about the reliability of those things? Then consider what happens if there's a failure in any one of those areas, be it a component or a connection. What happens if there's multiple failures? So as we're going through this talk, have a think about that for your own, for a service that you know something about or are currently working on. Now, this talk is probably not very relevant to you if you're working on a simple system like we have to the right. Typically, though, most of the systems that we're engineering are hard ones. They're systems that have multiple components and multiple connections between them. Chaos engineering allows us to improve the resilience of these systems by deliberately inducing failures into those systems in a controlled way, and then observing what the impact of those failures are, and reflecting on what we've learned through doing that injection, observing its impact, and then working out how we can improve it. Quite a few years ago, when continuous delivery was starting to become an embryonic idea popularized by Netflix, John Osborne and I can't remember which colleague, they did a talk at a conference, I think an O'Reilly Velocity conference, about what they're doing at Netflix. And John Osborne was speaking about this back in Lean Agile Scotland in October, and he said that at the end of their talk, when they were describing how they were typically doing lots and lots and lots of releases into production a day. Someone said to them that what they were doing was mad, and they were irresponsible in trying to promote it. And now look at where we are today. You know, continuous delivery has become very, very popular. It's been recognised as a really good practice. And one of the things that's helped us to achieve continuous delivery is by doing something we call build quality in. So ensuring that from the very start of the engineering process, everyone involved in engineering a change is thinking about quality, thinking about how we can get a change that is small and safe all the way through to production. And I believe the same kind of change, same kind of mindset change needs to happen for us to bring more chaos engineering aspects, think more about resilience of our systems. We need to be thinking about resilience as a whole team from the very outset of engineering something. This goes hand in hand, and thinking about resilience with also thinking about production. Each time we're engineering a change to a system, we should be thinking about how that change is going to behave in production and how it's going to interact with failures that do happen, that will happen, and how that change can fail itself. It's worth pausing a minute and thinking about what we mean by resilience, though. So, by saying we want to improve the resilience in something, it's not the same as robustness. We're not trying to build systems that are bulletproof or infallible. We're trying to design systems that can recover quickly, that are flexible, that are adaptable. I think the recent events with the coronavirus has shown the importance of resilience, both in terms of organizations and systems, and also our mental health. You know, it's very, very kind of difficult to build something that can withstand any kind of failure or any kind of significant issue with zero problems. But if we can design systems and process and help develop teams that can recover quickly, that can adapt to new situations and to problems that are occurring, then the world will be a better place. There's four approaches then to using chaos engineering on a kind of IT system, and I'll kind of briefly touch on all four, and then we'll focus mainly on chaos days. The fourth one is not shown here because it's something that's not so popular to talk about. So what I class as manual chaos is things like running a chaos day or going to something called an AWS game day. If you've not been to one of these, they're a great way of experiencing failures in a controlled environment and learning techniques for diagnosing failures and also designing systems that can be more resilient in the face of failure. If you're engineering a change and you want to do some manual testing around failure as well, then I class that as change-specific chaos. So it might be that your team's introducing a significant architectural change, and as part of the testing of that architectural change, you're deliberately invoking failures just to see what the impact is. For automated chaos here, I'm referring to things like the Chaos Monkey and that family of tools made famous by Netflix. Very, very simple and inexpensive way of achieving automated chaos is by using things like the AWS spot instances or preemptible VMs. These are compute instances that have an unpredictable lifetime. So they're cheap because they will be terminated at some point, and your system will get notification of their termination, but their lifetime is not guaranteed. That way, any services that are running within those compute instances need to handle termination in a graceful way. Now, I've seen this used to great effect in a number of organizations because it encourages developers particularly to design services that are running in these environments with a kind of a readiness for having to be shut down with very short notice. Another fun form of automated chaos is something that is shown here. So at one public sector organisation I worked at, we had a hackathon, and one of the things within the hackathon was we created this randomised pod killer where the team connected a Super Mario Bros. Emulator to a Kubernetes cluster, and every time Mario died, some poor Kubernetes pod was also killed. Then the third form of chaos engineering is what I call in process. This is probably more of a mature approach to chaos engineering. The way this works is that thinking about resilience and the need for kind of chaos engineering and chaos testing, it's baked into the process. It starts at the very, very beginning. So as the team is trying to define some change or new feature that they want to implement, they're thinking at that stage about failure modes. So, how might this change fail itself? How might other system failures impact this change? How should it be resilient to those changes? How do we design and implement it in a way so that it is tolerant to downstream systems failing, and it provides really good observability of when it itself fails? Then doing testing around that, and that testing might be a mixture of manual testing, where you're kind of manually invoking failures, or you might be as part of the automated tests. So, for instance, if you're using Terraform and the testing tools that go with it, you might be writing tests that deliberately invoke failures and explore what the kind of, or test that it has a resilient response. So the fourth type of chaos engineering that we don't talk about, but comes for free and doesn't require any planning, is unplanned chaos. And this is production incidents. So I know hardly anyone has production incidents, right? Well, they do happen. They're a fact of life, and how you kind of respond to them can, I guess, really impact how you can improve your system's resilience as a result. So I found that treating production instances as a learning opportunity is a really great way of getting the most benefit from them, and turning what could be a business cost or a business loss into something that's actually a benefit. So if you're wanting to think about how to kind of improve handling a post-instance, then I would really encourage you to look at different articles by places like Etsy and Google, and there's the Site Reliability Engineering Handbook on how to run post-incident reviews well. Those articles talk about how to document an incident as you're going through it, and then how to retrospect it, so how to step through it afterwards and get the most learning you can from any production incident. There's also kind of all sorts of tools that can help automatically kind of capture information and give you a trail that you can then walk through. I think Netflix have recently outsourced one of their tools for doing this. I'm sorry, open source one of their tools. Those tools are great, but as with a lot of things around Agile, it's best to kind of start with kind of doing this as simply as possible, using tools that have maximize collaboration. Don't get away. So to just simply either, if you can be face-to-face, then being face-to-face in the room and walk through it. If you've got to be remote, then using something like a Trello board or a Google Doc or a Miro whiteboard, and mapping out the system that had the failure, and then stepping through a timeline about the failure and discussing what people have learned. All these different approaches to chaos engineering help in many different ways. It's not just about building things into kind of technical improvements or putting in alerts. It's kind of the most benefit you get here is from people's learning. So helping people learn more about how distributed systems can fail and how those failures can propagate through them. It helps people understand how to respond better in a production instance. So it gives them the kind of automatic reflexes that help them diagnose things better, communicate better, and then come up with fixes better. It also helps improve your processes. A lot of the resilience improvements are really simple ways of how can teams communicate better, how can they share information better, and then finally, how can they improve their engineering process so that when they're designing changes at that stage, they can bake in resilience improvements. And the third set of improvements is the actual product. And it's surprising, sometimes one of the best improvements you can make to help with resilience is make your product simpler, so make it much easier for the teams that are operating it to reason about when there's a production incident. Look at its observability. So, what kind of log messages and error messages and alerts does your service emit when there's a problem, when there's about to be a problem? From any production incident review, you can generally always guarantee that people say, we need better alerts, we need better runbooks, we need maybe more graphs. Now, those things are given, and they shouldn't be dismissed outright, but I think for any production incident, it's focusing on kind of the deeper learning that you get by walking through what happened and looking at how perhaps does this complexity in the product contribute to our kind of slowness to fix the problem. It might be that there are some really beneficial improvements to things like runbooks and alertings that come out of post-incident review or chaos day, and they should be noted and considered for incorporation. But I'd encourage you not to take any kind of review of a chaos day or an incident and just focus solely on alerting and runbooks. There's so much more that we can get from it that can help us. Right, we'll now move on to focusing on running a chaos day, and starting off with how do you know when you're ready, and then how do you proceed? The context of the experience I'm talking from is a very large public sector system that had a lot of customers, a large number of delivery teams, all building things that effectively served separate journeys. So there's quite a lot of separation and independence in the delivery teams. There's not much coupling between them. This platform took a massive amount of traffic on the busiest day, which is getting a lot busier now with recent changes. And the main teams that are involved in the chaos days were the platform teams. So we had a large number of platform teams providing things like build and deployment tooling and telemetry tooling. So providing the systems that showed all the logs, metrics, alerts, teams that focused on improving the platform's underlying security, providing auditing across all of these services. So those kind of platform teams. We've been working with the client on this system for about 6 years now. And when we started, we were using fairly cutting edge technologies back then. So we were using Docker across all of the environments. And the platform grew really quickly. So it started off with just one team, then it grew to tens of teams. Then we were at the time using a cloud provider, so not Amazon, because Amazon weren't available in the UK, but another UK cloud provider. The system was growing really, really fast. The number of teams were growing really fast, and the resilience of the underlying cloud provider had some issues. So because of the combination of all those things, we were getting lots of unplanned chaos. There was enough production incidents to give us lots and lots of opportunity to learn. How can we improve the system's resilience? Things improved a little bit when we went to multi-active across 2 different cloud providers, but it was still quite painful. It was only until towards the end of 2017 when 2 things happened in combination. We were able to move wholesale to AWS. And when we did that, we saw a significant improvement in the resilience and performance of the underlying cloud system. We also enabled each delivery team on the platform to deploy to any environment whenever they wanted. Previously, in order to deploy to production, a delivery team, a public-facing delivery team, had to raise a ticket with one of the platform teams. And then that ticket meant they had to basically plug a USB stick into one server, take it out, walk across the room, and plug it into another, because there was an enforced air gap. So by getting that process change, that kind of freedom for the delivery teams to deploy anytime, that removed a significant kind of burden on the platform teams. So that combination of a much more resilient underlying cloud platform and a bit more capacity in the platform teams meant we were ready for doing our own kind of first chaos day. That's what we did in the beginning of 2018. So who would you typically involve in a chaos day? How do you know which environment to run it, and what are the steps that you go through? The starting point for a chaos day is thinking about who are going to be the kind of the people that are inflicting the chaos. We call them the agents of chaos. And this team, particularly when you're working across a number of teams that are contributing to the chaos day, It should be a virtual team that kind of operates without the other team members kind of knowing what it is they're doing. It's fine for them to know, the other team members to know who the agents of chaos are, but they shouldn't. I think for realism, they shouldn't know kind of what kind of devious acts they're planning. And we typically recommend that you pick one person from each of the teams that want to learn about the resilience of their systems, and you pick the kind of the most expert person. And there's two reasons for this. So by picking the most expert kind of person on the team, they'll bring with them all sorts of kind of deep knowledge about how the system works, and firstly, where are its weaknesses, where are the things that they're worried about in terms of where, when failures happen, and also how can they best simulate those failures. The other benefit of having an expert person is that person is generally the key person that the team goes to when there's a production incident. So they're the person that has the highest bus factor. If that person gets hit by a bus, the team are going to be really, really worried the next time a production incident comes around. So we're simulating when we actually run the chaos day by keeping these people away from the teams, working in the closed agents of chaos team. We're simulating that person being hit by a bus, being not available. So it's another form of chaos that we're playing in at the same time. Having identified who your agents of chaos are, the next step then is to think about the scope and to consider that there's a few different things that you need to kind of agree on with the agents of chaos. So you need to agree on what is our busiest traffic that we want to simulate, that we want to prepare for in terms of seeing how a combination of that traffic and chaotic events can impact our system. Having considered your kind of traffic, then think about your architecture. How does our architecture typically perform under that steady state? Which bits of it can we control? Which bits of it, if there were a failure, we believe they should be resilient to, or if there were a failure, we should be able to react quickly and provide an alternative kind of solution. It's really important that you kind of agree with the team. What are the things that it's kind of, there's little gain in testing? So what things are completely outside of your control? There were a few issues with GitHub yesterday. And if GitHub was unavailable to a lot of organizations, then yeah, that would be a problem. But it's kind of fairly unlikely for it to happen on a long-term basis, and B, there's not a lot teams can do about it. So it's more important to look at the failures that your team can respond to and can do something about. So having got the team together, identified kind of what the scope is, what the areas that they want to focus on, then the best thing to do is lock them away in a virtual, remote kind of closed room, and ask them to come up with as many different ideas about how things could fail, what things do they want to learn about, what things are they most worried about, and would like to see an experiment to kind of test out. Ask them to come up with as many ideas as possible and leave them to it for an hour. Generally, if you've got kind of group of experts together, and then they'll come up with all sorts of different things. When I've done this before, it's hard to kind of limit because they can generally come up with, I don't know, over 20, 30 different ideas. And they'll need boiling down eventually to a kind of a smaller list of about 10, because otherwise it could just get a bit out of hand. So having brainstormed lots of different ideas, then it's useful to, or you need to really kind of prioritize them and kind of boil down what are the key experiments that we'd like to run for this chaos day. And if you're doing this remotely, then it's very easy to use things like Trello to collate the ideas and mirror to draw out your architecture and design where you want to inject these failures and talk about ideas on how to do that. We also use Slack quite a lot for these things, so having a private channel where all the agents of chaos gather to discuss these ideas, that provides lots of opportunities to asynchronously share ideas. This is a Trello template that I've found really useful to get a bit more structure on each experiment. So having done the brainstorm, we then try and fill this in for each experiment we're going to prioritize. So we describe what's the failure that we're trying to simulate here. What is it we want to learn about? What failure are we worried about? And how are we expecting the system to respond? So this is a bit like our hypothesis here. We're You can test a failure and we expect a certain response to the system. The system to respond in a certain way. Then it's really important, having described the failure and how you expect the system to respond, to know how you're going to undo things if the failure is not successfully resolved. When we did our first chaos day, we didn't have that rollback step, and it took a few days for us to repair the environment that we were doing chaos engineering in. So it's quite important to know how you're going to roll back. Then the final point is what experiments you're going to do in series and which you're going to do in parallel. So it's useful to consider what experiments are going to, if you run them, they're going to basically limit any learning from any other experiments at the same time. And a good example of this is if you're running an experiment that takes out your telemetry stack. So if you run an experiment that stops all logs and metrics and alerts from propagating up to the teams, then they're going to be very, very blind to any other failures that are happening at the same time. So that's a good example where you would want to just do that one kind of telemetry experiment by itself without other things running at the same time. But on the other hand, there might be other experiments that you will want to do kind of in parallel. So for instance, you might want to fill up a disk on kind of one of your instances, and also increase the number of deployments that are going through for that service. Something that's useful to do in parallel to, or as part of a chaos day, is actually have people that are interested in security or security engineers simulate security attacks during the chaos day. Because during the production incident, people are really, really focused on trying to diagnose and resolve what's going on. And it means that if something kind of small but suspicious happens at the same time, it may not get noticed. So typically for the chaos days we run, we'll have a team of internal hackers, if you like, who are running security experiments just to see how well the kind of security systems and controls we've got in place kind of withstand those kind of deliberate attacks. Having got an idea of who's going to run the chaos and what they're actually going to do, you then need to agree where you're going to run it. Netflix are very famous because they run their experiments in production at a very large scale. They take down whole kind of availability zones and regions in the US. You don't need to run experimental chaos days in production. A kind of production-like environment is really important. And for I think the 4 we've run so far, we've always done them in a pre-production environment. What's key is that the environment, you can inject a load that is either production-like or gives enough traffic going through that environment that it will trigger the kind of failures and alerts that will allow you to learn what would happen if that was happening in production. The environment also needs to have the telemetry, so the ability for services to emit logs, metrics and alerts as though they would do in production. That might require a bit of setup and tear down before and after the chaos day. As part of deciding on the environment, it's important to consider kind of just how much of the environment you want to target. If there's a large number of teams working on the environment, some of those teams might work on or require the environment for a very critical release. So you should consider that when you're considering the date or days that you can run these experiments over, and either constrain the experiments to just a particular part that won't impact those teams, or if you've got agreement for all the teams working on the platform, run it as far as kind of wide as you can. As part of choosing the environment, you also need to agree how will problems be reported. So the organisation who have done this, we have Slack channels that are clearly named per environment. So if there is an issue in production, we have an event production issues Slack channel where we discuss production issues. And we have a similar one for staging and QA, etc. If you're going to be running a chaos day in a staging environment, then you need to communicate to all the teams that are responding to those kind of experiments that they should use the event staging issues Slack channel to discuss issues, and they should be treating those issues as though they were production-like issues. That's all the preparation you need to do. The next thing to consider then is the actual day itself. We've discussed quite a lot internally at the previous client whether we should be giving people warning or not. And to start off, we gave a lot of warning, and then we kind of reduced how much warning we gave. In the most recent chaos day, we actually ran it over a week because we thought it's useful for people to know kind of roughly when it's happening. But if we spread experiments over several days, then that adds a bit more realism. Teams aren't waiting around watching all their dashboards and monitors trying to detect when an experiment's about to kick off. It's hard to predict. It's useful though for teams to have a rough idea of when it's going to happen, just so they can schedule things around it. So for instance, if there's a critical release that needs to pass through the environment, that you've got a set of experiments running in, then you probably want to either change the environment or kind of limit the experiments or change the date. What's key is that all the teams that are responding to the chaos experiment need to be treating it though as just another ordinary day, because you don't plan for production outages. You don't know when your production system is going to go down, and that's what it should be with the kind of the chaos day as well. Your team should be busy working on their regular stuff. We also need to agree, particularly with the agents of chaos, when they're going to stop doing things and put everything right. As I said before, the first time we ran our chaos day, it took days to repair the environment, and we weren't very popular as a result. Then on the day itself, for the agents of chaos, you need to virtually co-locate them, either physically if you can, or have them in their own Slack channel, their own Google Hangout or Zoom call or whatever. So have them in a place where they can easily communicate, because as they're going through the experiments, things are going to change. What we've found is that each time you can start running an experiment, it may not behave quite as how you expect it to. Plus, coordinating different experiments, making sure that you've got the right ones running concurrently and separating those that need their own space requires quite a lot of high bandwidth coordination. The Trello template that I showed you earlier is really useful, and then having a Trello board that shows you what experiments you've got in your backlog, be prioritized, and then having them showing what's in progress and the outcome is a good way of coordinating what you're doing as well. It's helpful to have a single person who's facilitating, like conducting the different experiments, because typically the engineers can get quite engrossed in what they're doing and may spend a lot longer either letting the experiment run or kind of making it worse and worse. So it's helpful to have someone who can step back a bit, kind of take a look at what's happening across the platform, across the teams, and just ensure that each experiment is being time boxed, that you're getting through the appropriate number of experiments in the day, just to maximize the kind of learnings you're getting from it. Finally, in order to get most learning from the reviews you do after the chaos day, it's really important that both the agents of chaos and those responding to experiments document what they're doing. And no one likes documentation, I agree. But if you're using things like Trello and Slack channels where people are disciplined in kind of writing about into Slack what it is they're doing, and they're communicating any kind of offline or kind of discussions that are happening by video call. Just so there's for instance, in Slack or Trello, there's a kind of timestamp sequence that shows who did what when, what did they observe in terms of people responding or systems responding. It makes the analysis and post-instance reviews much better and easier to do. It's a great way of practicing as well how you would actually record a production incident. For all the other people that are responding to the chaos that's going on around them, again, they're reacting as though it's just another ordinary day. People shouldn't be sat around watching monitors. They should be busy doing their regular things. A great time for running the first experiment is when daily stand-up is, for example, because production incidents don't happen when stand-ups happen, do they? The same thing about self-documenting applies to all the teams responding. They should be treating each chaos experiment as though it's a real production incident and applying the same kind of discipline and due diligence to communicating well about what are they doing, what are they seeing, how they're responding to things, so that other people that might be able to help can see what's happening and get involved, particularly when you're working in a remote first situation. But then also when you reflect on the incident afterwards, you've got that trail either in Slack or Trello or a Google Doc that shows who observed what when, and why did people take different actions. It's really critical that people take this kind of the simulation seriously, and that they do try and kind of act as though it were their production estate that was on fire at the time. Having got to the end of the chaos day or the chaos week, if you want to kind of draw it out and add a bit more surprise, it's then really important to do a kind of a retrospective. Where you've got multiple teams involved in a chaos day, it's useful to ask each team to run their own retrospective and to focus on two different things. So each team runs their own retrospective, then come together, have someone from each team go to a team of teams retrospective. And in both those sessions, we're focusing first on learnings. So what are the learnings about how we can how our systems work and how we can improve the resilience, both from the kind of people, process, and product aspect? That should be the chief focus of the retrospective. Then it's likely you're going to want to run a chaos day again. So as part of the retrospective, think about what small improvements, tweaks would you make to your next chaos day to make it more effective, to maximize the kind of learning that you get from it. I'll reiterate what I said kind of earlier about post-incident reviews. You get a lot of learning by treating part of this retrospective as a post-incident review for each experiment. And when you're doing that, it's important to focus on what do people observe, what do people see, what led people to look at a particular dashboard or respond in a particular way. Why didn't they take certain actions? We're trying to draw out how people work, the knowledge that people have in their heads about how systems work. And that knowledge is often what helps the teams keep our systems going, help the system be more resilient. By sharing that knowledge, that's where you get a lot of the learning. It's not just about where are runbooks out of date, what alerts are missing. Over the years, we've learned quite a lot of things about how to run chaos days well. Starting really small is a good idea. So perhaps starting with just one or two teams and maybe 5 different experiments at the beginning. I think each time you run a chaos day, try and constrain just how many experiments and how big those experiments are, because for the teams that are responding to them, it can be quite hard work dealing with lots and lots of fires at the same time. I think it's important to balance that, how much pain you inflict with how much work the team is having to do to kind of resolve things. We've not ever run chaos days on production. I think there can be valuable learning in doing that, but it's not essential. It's important that you try and go for a production-like environment, but that still requires some thought, some setup, and some teardown. Finally, chaos days are a great way for to learn about your systems, but also to learn about each other and to kind of have fun, particularly when you're mixing people from different teams in the agents of chaos. What we found is each time we ran a chaos day, the next one would have different agents of chaos, and everyone wanted to kind of rotate into that team just to get some payback opportunity. But I hope I've given you lots of different ideas about how you can use chaos engineering techniques and chaos days to learn more about your systems and improve your system's resilience. When you go away from this kind of expert talk, have a think about what your system is like, how ready is it for doing chaos engineering? What kind of aspects of chaos engineering could you incorporate to improve its resilience? We've distilled some of our knowledge into some playbooks that this deck will be going out after the talk, and there's a link there to our playbooks that covers how to run a chaos day, also covers remote first, and plus our security playbook as well, which has quite a lot of overlap with some of the things that I've talked about. We're also able to help organizations that are interested in running chaos days to kind of provide advice and facilitate running their first one. So we're very happy to talk to people about that as well. All right, thank you very much for listening. I think we're going to move on to some questions now. So let's have a look in the Q&A tab.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Lyndsay. For the Q&A, for the questions, I see some people have started voting. That's great. I was trying to type it into the chat, but if people could have a quick look at those questions, if there's anything that that everyone's particular particularly passionate about Lyndsay picking up first and answering, we'll give you just a minute to do some quick voting on there, so you can do a thumbs up on it, and then we'll go through the questions. Thank you everyone for putting them in there. It's brilliant. Right. So Lyndsay, can you see them in the prioritized order?
Q&A. I'm looking at the Q&A tab, and it's got open questions.
Yeah, that's right. It's got.
They prioritise with the first one at the top, is it?
Yes, that's right. So I see Matthias is at the top with 9 votes. 9 thumbs up.
So what level of maturity from a DevOps kind of view should an organisation reach before starting experimenting with chaos engineering? And Russ Miles has given a helpful response already, starting about chaos very early. Yes, for example, get asked whether you need to have high quality logging tracing. Yeah, so I echo what kind of Russ is saying there, that a bit like with continuous delivery, trying to start thinking about how to build quality into what you're kind of engineering. That can be done at the start, with teams of any level. And the same comes with kind of resilience, and thinking about the importance of considering failures. So I don't think you don't need to be running kind of Kubernetes or EKS on AWS, or having kind of Terraform automating all of your infrastructure. It's a mindset change. So I think starting just with the team to think about what failures can happen, and how they can take one step to improve the resilience is a good way of starting. Okay, shall we move on to the next question?
Cool. Yeah. So it's useful to read out the question as well. I'll read it out to save you having to do all the talking. It's just so when people are watching the video later, they'll be able to know what we're answering. So Helen has asked, if it took you a couple of days to repair the chaos, did you need to repair any relationships from people who might have been inadvertently affected, specifically any commercial or salespeople, to be able to have confidence to conduct the next one?
A great question. We did some comms out afterwards that kind of shared what we'd learned, and where we'd seen the benefits. And there was a real positive reception to those comms. It did take a little bit of apologising, and I think in those comms we recognised the impact that we'd had, and the need to do things differently next time. It was beneficial that we were impacting a pre-production environment, so it added extra work to people, but it didn't impact our kind of customers directly. The organisation, I think, recognised the benefits of it enough that they were very happy for us to do another one. But they were clear that if we do another one, we need to kind of do it slightly differently.
Okay, that's great. And then the next question we've got from Adam. So, do performance tests ever get run in conjunction with chaos days?
Yeah, definitely. So we've found it really useful to run performance tests that simulate our peak load. The peak load for the particular part of the system that we're interested in. So in our first chaos day, we ran it just about a month prior to a key business event at the organisation. So we picked the performance tests that simulated that key business event, and we had them kind of running fairly continuously whilst we were running experiments at the same time. You don't have to kind of run things to that level, but it's important that you do have some load going through your system, and that can impact then which environment you choose.
Okay, great. And Russ has just popped an answer in there as well. Do you want to be better prepared for surprising incidents? Do you want to improve our investment in robustness? And feeling cheeky, how about we practice reliability rather than just hope? Okay, thanks for the comments, Russ.
One of the ways we solved it when we first proposed it was that that we, since moving to AWS, and that involved some improvements to our architecture, we believed that our system was, very resilient, and we wanted to actually test that out, improve it ahead of the key business event. And so we saw that a chaos day would be an opportunity to demonstrate that some of the resilience mechanisms that we put in place would be effective, which people were kind of keen on. I think by also giving assurances that we could have minimal impact on the business's delivery at the same time, that was kind of a welcome thing. Plus, it's a cool thing to do. I think that was another selling point, that lots of organisations want to be as good as Netflix. They can't always afford to be or need to be, but it was a fairly easy sell, to be honest.
Cool. And actually, I realised there was a revoting of a question there, and I jumped into Russ's answer. But the question that Lyndsay was answering there was from Rob, saying, "How do you first propose this approach to senior stakeholders?" So yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, we've done that one. Then we've got. And actually, so Sylvia has asked the same question. So, have you had difficulty in convincing senior leadership to do chaos days, or are they unaware? So, I think Lyndsay, you gave an answer there about how you might go about it. But have there been any real challenges? What has been the big pushback when trying to do this?
I think the organisation, the public sector one I'm referring to, it was because we'd been involved from the outset of the kind of evolution of the platform. It was a fairly easy thing to convince them of, and they were very aware of it to a senior level. For another organisation, we've done this out recently. It's taken several months to, I guess, warm them up to the idea. So we wouldn't suggest that you kind of just rock up to an organisation or your own organisation say, "Oh, let's run a chaos day." I think it first kind of requires you to assess, our teams, do they have a regular production instance? Because if you have regular production instance, then that's a really good reason for running a chaos day in conjunction with improving how you do kind of post-mortems. Also, having people kind of aware of the risks that are ongoing and the failures that are ongoing in a production environment is a key thing. If there is that awareness and that recognition that our systems are always kind of close to failure, and that there is value in us preparing for that. I think a key indicator is seeing how do your teams respond when there's a production incident. There's like good ways the teams can respond, and there's not so good ways. And if the team are kind of very ineffective at responding to a production incident, then I think that's a good place to have a starting point for a conversation. Is explore how could teams get better at responding to production incidents. Look at some of the kind of the easy things you could do in that area, and that would probably then lead on to chaos days.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Lyndsay. So the next question we've got here is from Ajit. How do you plan which service layer is switched off? Because if too many things get switched off, it may just hide issues or introduced in a layer beneath.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this is where it's useful to have experts from each component team in the room when you're designing the experiments, because it's through those conversations about each experiment and which of the experiments are kind of safe to do in parallel and which can be done in isolation. That's where you think about the impact of one experiment on the other. And having an architecture diagram, visible to the team either in Miro board or Google Draw or something that allows people to kind of annotate the impact is useful. So you do need to be cognizant of how a journey that a performance test is simulating will kind of go through a system and a stack, and then what's the impact of causing failures in different parts of that stack. Part of the kind of good thing with chaos days is that you may not know how multiple failures will impact a journey. So if you don't know and you've got concerns about that impact, then it's a great place to kind of run an experiment where you perhaps try 2 or 3 different failures and just see what happens.
Cool. And then our last question Or there's another one snuck up in the chat from Rob, which we'll have a look at in a bit. But so Adam is asking, are issues from chaos days ever fixed with UX solutions or solely DevOps solutions?
Okay, I'll answer the second part of that question first. So they're not fixed solely by DevOps solutions. A lot of the kind of the problems can be fixed by just simple process improvements. So agreeing that the next time we have an incident, where you're going to use a public Slack channel to discuss it. And so a lot of it is like people, well, it's fixing the wetware. In terms of UX solutions, yeah, I think that's a good example of where when teams are designing systems, if they can be more cognizant about how failures can ripple up through the system, and that at some point during a user journey, something downstream could fail that's going to interrupt their journey. So from a UX perspective, what should be happening? Should the user be given the opportunity to retry? How much information about the error should they be given? Are they going to have to reattempt the whole user journey again, or is it just a small part? I think it's really important to consider failure in the context of UX, which goes back to the whole kind of the mindset change, that chaos days are not just for DevOps engineers. That they provide learning for anyone that's involved in engineering an IT service.
That's great. And the last question, because we're also just a minute left. So Rob Cole, this is a great one. Nervous or excited before you start Chaos Day?
I think I'm generally a mixture of both. So I'm nervous because I'm worried about how well it's going to go, because when I'm facilitating them, I'm wanting people to A, enjoy it, and B, kind of learn lots. And a lot of the things I worry about is that people find it frustrating and tedious, or that their experiments won't actually uncover any learnings. So I'm nervous from that perspective. But then as the day generally goes on, and you see people enjoying running their experiments, learning about how their experiments are impacting things, and then you see conversations happening about what people are observing, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and that kind of excites me. So it's a very rewarding thing to do.
All right, that's brilliant. So thank you very much, everybody. We are at 7 o'clock BST, and we're going to wrap it up there. The one thing I would say is a lot of everything Lyndsay talks about here, we do have a playbook. I think you mentioned that before, Lyndsay. If you have a look at playbook.ee, you'll see all the playbooks that we've published so far. They're all open source. We welcome feedback and also pull requests. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We'll be sending out some more information afterwards. When the video is ready, we'll send it all out to you. And we will see you next time. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.